Hey, what's up? What's going on? Everyone chilling? That's very good. That's very good. As my friend Nachman Futterman says, Nachman, are you listening to this, Nachman? Anyways, Nachman Futterman, he says, chilling's the best. Nachman, you're the best, Nachman. Hello. How are you, Nachman? Anyways, here we go. Daf Tzadi Dalet of Masechta Shabbis. Great daf today. What can I tell you? Great daf. It's pretty involved. There's a lot going on. It's kind of unassuming. I thought it would take me quicker to learn, but it actually took me longer to learn. So here we go. So a little overview before we begin. We're going to talk about taking out food in a kli. We've mentioned this a few times. The idea. Well, obviously we've been talking about the minimum share of food in general, like a grogeris, but we're going to talk about that a little bit now. Talk about taking out animals, taking out humans. The concept of nosei atzmo, somebody who's alive carries his own weight. So you can carry somebody on Shabbos because it's considered like the person is carrying himself. Get back into Melacha trikha legufa shtickle. Understand a little bit more Reb Shimon's opinion, who says that Melacha trikha legufa is pater. How does he define Melacha trikha legufa, which is pretty cool. I have written here removing extra stuff. Okay, hopefully that'll make more sense a little bit later. Removing fingernails. Anybody know about that? Probably, right? Speaking of Nachman Futterman, Nachman, do you remember when I learned Masechta Shabbos? Oh gosh, that must have been in 2011. This must have been, it was the winter, so it was either like late 2011, early 2012. Nachman, I was once at your house on Shabbos for lunch, and I think Miriam asked me if I had something to share, like a Dvar Torah or something, and I didn't. But I had learned this daf that week, and we talked about removing fingernails, so I kind of shared the halacha of removing fingernails. Nachman, you remember that, Nachman? Apparently I do. Alright, friends, let's move on. Daf Tzadi Daled of Masechta Shabbos. We're going to begin on Daf Tzadi Gimel Amud Beis, towards the bottom, at the Mishnah. Hamotzi ochlin palchus mikshir. Oh, somebody who takes out on Shabbos food that is less than a shear. Now, of course, we all know at this point that what is the shear? Everyone tell me all at once. What's the shear for taking out ochlin on Shabbos? Or for any melacha that regards food on Shabbos? That's right, a grogeris. So if you take out less than a grogeris on Shabbos, bechli, and it's in a vessel, okay? Pater af ala kli shakli tveilelo. So you're going to be pater even for taking out the vessel, the container that this less than a shear is. Let's say half of a fig. So if you have half of a fig in a Tupperware, so you are going to be pater not just for the half a fig, but also for the Tupperware. As a chai b'mita, if you have a person who is alive and you are taking him out in a bed, pater af alamita shamita tveilelo. So you're going to be patur, exempt even for the bed that this person is lying in, because the bed is null, it is nullified, it is batel, it doesn't say batel. Whoa, 1 second. It's not batel, it's tafel. It's secondary. It's not non-existent, but it's secondary to the person, so therefore for all intents and purposes it is irrelevant, and we consider it to be a chai nosei atzmo, somebody who's alive carries himself, and therefore you will not be chai for carrying him, and nor for the bed, because the bed is secondary to him. Es hameis b'mita, if you have, however, a corpse in a bed, so chayiv. So then you will be chayiv for carrying the corpse, okay? And now we're saying v'chein kazayis min hameis, and it's not just a dead body, but even an olive's worth from a dead body. V'chazayis min hanevela, or a kazayis from a non-slaughtered animal, meaning a dead but not non-slaughtered animal, v'chadasha min hasheretz, as well as a lentil size from a sheretz, from a little bug, chayiv. You're going to be chayiv for taking that out, because you're taking it out for a reason, so that because you don't want this tumah in your house, so therefore you are removing it and you're going to be chayev for that. Now, Reb Shimon poter. Reb Shimon says, Lamaise, you're going to be poter, because it's a Melacha she'eina trikha legufa, and we're going to understand in just a little bit how exactly Reb Shimon is defining Melacha she'eina trikha legufa. It's pretty interesting, for me at least. Friends, let's take a look at the Gemara. Taner Abanon, the rabbis taught, Hamotzi ochlin kishiur. Okay, so if you bring out on Shabbos from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim food, and it's at least the minimum size, so that would be, of course, a dried fig's worth. Okay. Bichli, skip the word im. Bichli chayev ala ochlin ufater ala kli. So you took a dried fig, you put it into a Tupperware, and now you take the Tupperware from your house into the Rishus HaRabim. Okay. So you are going to be poter. No, not poter. You're going to be chayev. You're going to be chayev for taking out the dried fig. However, you're going to be poter for the Tupperware. That's irrelevant. Okay, fine. Ve'im haya kli tzarich lo chayev af ala kli. However, says this brisa, that if you needed the Tupperware, let's say you're going to a potluck in the park for Shabbos lunch, and your contribution is a dried fig. Anyways, so you're going to this potluck, and you have your dried fig in your Tupperware. Now, the Tupperware is not simply a container to transport your dried fig. It is also going to be your plate over there, okay? And you're going to be able to take food, put it in your Tupperware. So you actually, so the Tupperware is not simply a vessel in which to transport your dried fig. It is also important in and of itself, because it's going to be your plate at the potluck in the park, okay? So Shema Mina, no. Friends, you ready for this sugya? I'm sure it's going to bring back very warm memories of Daf, what was it, Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph or something? Ayin Beis Amud Aleph, maybe? Anyways, Shema Mina, Ochel Shnei Zeisei Chelev Behelem Echad Chayiv Shtayim. So, this would imply, no, from the fact that we're saying that you accidentally took outside a dried fig in a Tupperware. If you need both the dry fig and the Tupperware, you're going to be chayiv twice. You're going to be chayiv 2 korban chatases. Well, what does that tell us about the sugya of ochel shnei zeisei chelev behelem echad? That if he ate 2 kizesim of chelev in one mistake, so we had assumed that you'd be chayiv only 1 korban chatases, right? It's 1 helim. You didn't realize in the middle. You ate 2 kizesim of chelev, so you only be chayiv once, right? However, this seems to be implying that even though you're doing the same melacha of hutzah on 2 objects, you're doing hutzah twice without realizing in between. And we're saying you're going to be chayiv for both the hutzah for the dried fig as well as the hutzah for the Tupperware. Wouldn't that imply that somebody who eats 2 kizesim of chelev without realizing in the middle, he would be chayiv 2 korban chatases? So Amar Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes says no. Do not compare the 2. Hachav ma'eskinon kegon sheshagag ala ochlin behezid ala kli. Interesting. So Rav Sheshes says this is different than ochel shnei zeisei chelev behelem echad. What's happening in this scenario is that the guy by accident took out the dried fig. I don't know, maybe he thought that maybe he thought you're allowed to take out food on Shabbos, okay? So he made an accident regarding the dried fig. However, he knew that he wasn't able to bring out the Tupperware, and he did that on purpose. So we're actually not talking about 2 korban chatases here. Forget it. We're talking about 1 korban chatas for the dried fig, and then we're talking about chayav misa, essentially, for the Tupperware. So those are 2 separate things. If they were both bishogeg, so yeah, you would only be chayav 1 korban chatas, according to Rav Sheshes. Just like achol shnei zeisei chelev behelem achas, you'd only be chayav 1. However, this was talking about where there was a shogeg regarding the dried fig, but he was bemazed regarding the Tupperware. And that's what it means, chayav af al hakli. It means he's chayav a korban chatas for the dried fig, and he's chayav misa for the Tupperware. Alright, exciting. What about kamle b'derab mineh? What about kamle b'derab mineh? We had that the other day, right? Right, when it came to the guy who stole the purse, and there was the hotzah and the gneva at the same time. So if we're saying that he's basically going to be chayiv, obviously, for the mistama, he's going to be chayiv for the fig and for the kli at the same time. And if we're saying that he's doing the kli b'mezid and he's chayiv misa for that, so then shouldn't we say kamle b'derab mineh and say that he should be chayiv misa, but he shouldn't be chayiv korban chatas? L'maisa, I don't know. I don't know l'maisa. Does Taisva say anything? I don't know. Maybe. I can't tell. Let's go on. So, okay, very good. So that is how Rav Sheshes deals with this case. That's why he's chayiv for the kli. He's chayiv a korban chatas for the food, which was b'shogeg, and he's chayiv misa for the kli, which was b'mezid. Let's go weiter. Maskef Rav Ashi. Now Rav Ashi asks a question against Rav Sheshes. Ve'af ala kli katani. 1 second, says Rav Ashi. The Brisa says that he's chayiv even for the kli, meaning it sounds like he's chayiv the same thing, not just for the food, but also for the kli, i.e., he's going to be chayiv a korban chatas for both. He's going to be chayiv 2 korban chatases. It's not saying that he's chayiv one thing for the food and another thing for the kli, right? That he's chayiv a korban for the food and he's chayiv misa for the kli. No, it says af ala kli kilu, that they're in the same boat. That just like he's chayiv a korban for the food, he's also going to be chayiv a korban for the kli. So Ella Amar Rav Ashi, rather says Rav Ashi, kigon sheshagak bazeh uvazeh v'nodelo v'chazav v'nodelo. Ha 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 ha. It's bringing back all fond memories of all the great sugyas from the other day. And then remember there was that ukimta where he ate 2 kizesim of chelev without realizing in the middle. Fine. However, he first found out about the first one, and then he found out about the second one. And there was that machlokas dar'in between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. That Rabbi Yochanan said that since he found out about the first kazayis of chelev and the second kazayis of chelev separately, you have to bring 2 korban chatases. Rish Lakish, however, said that no, even in that case, you only bring 1 korban chatas for both of them, even when you found out about them separately. And therefore, what the Gemara is saying, that's what happened here as well. You took out the dried fig in the Tupperware. Behelamachas. So for that, you'd really be chayiv 1 korban chatas. However, when you found out about them, you found out about them separately. First, you found out that, regarding the fig, you made a mistake. Then you found out that regarding the Tupperware, you made a mistake. And because you found out about them separately, according to Rav Ashi, he's going to say like Rabbi Yochanan, which is that you'd bring 2 korban chatases, and that's how he's explaining the Brisa. However, Rav Sheshes would argue on Rav Nachman, and he would say, like Rish Lakish's opinion, that even when he would find out about them separately, he would still only have to bring 1 korban chatas, right? And therefore, so in our case, where he brought out the dried fig in the Tupperware, okay? And then he finds out first about the dried fig, and then he finds out about the Tupperware, right? Rav Sheshes holds like Rish Lakish, who would say you would still only have to bring only 1 korban chatas. So then, how does Rav Sheshes deal with the Brisa that says that he's chayiv even for the kli? What do you mean he's chayiv even for the kli? That's why he explains that what it means is he's chayiv even for the kli, meaning that he's chayiv misa for the kli. Kilu, he's chayiv a korban chatas for the dried fig, and he's chayiv misa for the kli, for the Tupperware, because he did that one on purpose. Because if he would have done them both by accident, then he would only be chayiv to bring 1 korban chatas. Because of ochel shnei zeised chelev be'elam echad, eino chayiv ela achas. Okay, makes sense, everyone? Everyone got that? Good. So let's read it inside. So Ella Amar Rav Ashi, so it says Rav Ashi kigon sheshagag bazeh uvazeh, right? That he made a mistake both regarding the dried fig as well as regarding the Tupperware. Vinodalo, and first he found out, let's say, about the dried fig because of vinodalo, and then afterwards he found out about the mistake regarding the Tupperware. We've looked at Rabbi Yochanan and Reb Shimon ben Lakish, and the machlokas between Rav Nachman and Reb Sheshes is like the machlokas between Reb Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Reb Nachman holds like Reb Yochanan, that if you find out about one and then find out about the other, you bring 2 korban chatases. Reb Sheshes holds like Rish Lakish, that when you find out about one, then you find out about the other, you only bring 1 korban chatas, and therefore in order to explain what it means that you'd be chayiv even for the Tupperware, Rav Sheshes has to say where the Tupperware was on purpose and he's chayiv misa for the Tupperware. Friends, let's keep on going. Es a chay b'mita, pater afal hamita. So the Mishnah had said that if you take out to Rosh Hashanah a live person, Baruch Hashem, a healthy live person in his bed, sounds like a fun activity. So you're going to be pater for the person as well as for the bed. Lema masnisin, Rabbi Nasan hi vilo Rabbanon. Okay. So let's say that this Mishnah, therefore, is Rabbi Nasan, and let's say that the author of the Mishnah is not the rabbis. How come? The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa. Hamotzi behema chayiv va'of l'reshus harabim. Okay. Somebody who takes out to Reshus harabim a animal, a domesticated animal, a wild animal, or a bird, bein chayin uvein shchutin chayav. So whether this animal or bird is alive, whether it is slaughtered, i.e. it's dead, you're going to be chayav. That's the opinion of the Chachamim, of the Tanna Kama. Reb Nasan Omer, al shchutin chayav, val chayin pater, shechay nosei atzmo. Now Reb Nasan argues on the Chachamim, and he says, no, if these animals or birds are slaughtered, they're not alive, so then you're chayiv, sure. But if they are alive, then you are pater for taking them out to Rosh Hashanah, because hachay nosei atzmo, something that is alive carries its own weight, carries itself, and you are not considered to be carrying it. And therefore, the Gemara wants to assume that the same machlokas between the Chachamim and Reb Nasan regarding animals would apply as well to humans. Okay? And therefore, just like the Chachamim say that you'll be chayiv even if you take out live animals, and Reb Nasan says you're pater if you take out live animals, well, they would say the same thing also regarding humans, that if you carry a human in a bed on Shabbos, the Chachamim will say that you're chayiv, and Reb Nasan will say that you're pater. And therefore our Mishnah is Reb Nasan. That's what the Gemara wants to say. Amar Rava, says Rava, afilu tema Rabbanon. You can even say that our Mishnah is the Rabbanon. You can even say that our Mishnah that says that it's permitted, or that at least you're pater, for carrying out a human, could even be the Rabbanon. What about the fact that they said that if you carry out a live animal, you're chayiv? Ad kan lo plige Rabbanon ale de Rab Nasan ele bebehema chayiv of the misharvite nafshayu. The Rabbanon only argue with Rab Nasan with regards to animals and birds because they are, make it difficult for you to move them, right? You try to pull them and they kind of fight against you, and therefore it's not considered like they are carrying themselves, and that's why you're chayiv even for live animals and birds. Aval adam chai de nosei atzmo afilu rabbanon modu. However, a person who is alive, and therefore we consider, and he's not trying to be difficult, right? And we say chai nosei atzmo, a live person carries his own weight as opposed to dead weight, right? Live weight is lighter. So at least that's my understanding. And so therefore, if you are taking out a human being in a bed on Shabbos, even the Chachamim would say that you would be pater, because they apply the rule of achai nosei atzmo to human beings, even though they don't apply it to animals, because animals kind of will sort of what's it called? To resist, I guess, and try to make it more difficult for you. Amalei Rav Ada bar Ahava l'Rava. So Rav Ada bar Ahava says to Rava. Now this is interesting to me because my understanding is that Rav Ada bar Ahava was a student of Rav, which would make Rav Ada bar Ahava a relatively older Amora. That would make him kind of like the generation of Rav Yehuda. That's pretty high up. Whereas Rava was lower than that. You know, there was Rav, and then there was Rav Yehuda, there was Rabba, and then there was Rava. Right? Rava was a student of Rabba. He was also a student of Rav Nachman. So he was much later. So it would be interesting to, if Rav Ada bar Ahava was really having this discussion directly with Rava, Although interestingly, a little bit later on the page, we're going to see Rav Ada bar Masna. So I wonder if maybe it was initially Rav Ada bar Masna and somehow the girsa changed over the years. I don't know, speculation. But in any event, the Gemara says Rav Ada bar Ahava. So Amar le Rav Ada bar Ahava le Rava. So Rav Ada bar Ahava said to Rava. So one second, Rava, you are saying that the Chachamim would agree with Reb Nasin when it comes to human beings, to say that we would apply the rule of achai nosei atzmo, and the Chachamim would also agree that you'd be potter for carrying out a human on Shabbos because achai nosei atzmo. But listen up. V'adatnan, but what about the following Mishnah from Masechta Avodah Zarah? So the Mishnah in Masechta Avodah Zarah says that you are not permitted to sell a wild animal, behema gasa, a large animal. You're not able to sell a large animal to a non-Jew. How come? Because we're concerned that if you sell animals to non-Jews, so let's say like an ox, so you might then end up lending oxen to non-Jews. Okay, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that if you lend your ox to your non-Jewish next door neighbor, he might work with it on Shabbos. Now, I am responsible for making sure that my ox has a day of rest on Shabbos. And therefore, I would not be allowed to lend my ox to my next door neighbor for him to work his field with it on Shabbos. And therefore, out of concern that if we allow Jews to sell their oxen to non-Jews, which would be fine because once you sell it, it's not yours anymore. But what might end up happening is that you might lend it to non-Jews, and that would be a problem because then they might end up using it on Shabbos. So now, what do we say over there? Ben Beseira matir besus. Okay. We say over there that, however, Ben Beseira says that you would be allowed to sell a horse to a non-Jew. Vitanya, we learn in a brisa, Ben Beseira matir besus mipnei shu oseh bo melacha she'en chayav olav chatas. And we learn in a brisa that Ben Beseira says that you're allowed to sell a horse to a non-Jew, because even if that leads to Jewish people lending their horse to non-Jewish people, that wouldn't really be a big deal because horses don't really do melacha on Shabbos. Because what is a horse used for? A horse is used for people to ride on. Now, if we assume that achai nosei atzmo, that a human being carries himself, well then, what's the worst that can happen? So a Jew will lend his horse to a non-Jew. The non-Jew will ride the horse on Shabbos. So what? The horse isn't doing anything. What? It's carrying a person? The person's carrying himself. The horse isn't doing anything. And therefore, Ben Beseira says that you would be allowed to sell a horse to a non-Jew because there's really no concern, because what's the problem? People might end up lending their horses to non-Jews, so what? It'll do Melacha on Shabbos? No, it won't. What's it going to do? Carry people? The people carry themselves. So therefore, Ben Beseira says that you would be allowed to sell a horse to a non-Jew. Ve'amar Rabbi Yochanan, and says Rabbi Yochanan, Ben Beseira Reb Nasin amru davar echad. So now interestingly, Rabbi Yochanan says that Ben Beseira and Reb Nasin say the same thing. Meaning, the reason why Ben Beseira says that you're allowed to sell a horse to a non-Jew is essentially because of this law of achai nosei atzmo. That even if the non-Jew will, you'll lend it to a non-Jew and he will ride it on Shabbos, there's still no problem because we assume achai nosei atzmo. Now, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that Ben Beseira and Reb Nasin agree, i.e., that both Ben Beseira and Reb Nasin agree that achai nosei atzmo. Who's missing from this statement? The Chachamim, of course. The implication being that the Chachamim do not agree that achai nosei atzmo. The Chachamim would, right? Rabbi Yochanan is saying that Ben Beseira agrees with Reb Nasin, but the Chachamim would not agree with them. The Chachamim would say that you would not be allowed to sell your horse to a non-Jew, because we have to be concerned that maybe you're going to lend Jews are going to lend their horse to a non-Jew, and the non-Jew is going to ride the horse, and that'll be a problem, because we don't say hachai nosei es atzmo by human beings. So there you go. So that seems to be a kasha on Rava, who says that the Chacham would agree with Reb Nosson when it comes to humans and say hachai nosei es atzmo. But if that was the case, then why is Reb Yochanan saying that Ben Beseira agrees with Rav Nosson? He should say that Ben Beseira agrees with everybody, with the Chachamim as well. The Amar delo pligei Rabbanan alei Rab Nosson ele bebehema chayev v'of mishum demsharviten avshayu. And if you're going to say that the Chachamim only disagree with Rab Nosson when it comes to animals, because animals sort of resist your efforts to move them, but by humans, they would agree with Rab Nosson that hachai nosei es atzmo, then my irya ben beseir of Rab Nosson, then why is Rabbi Yochanan saying that specifically Ben Beseira and Rab Nosson are in the same boat? Ve'amar tafilu rabbanan modu. But didn't you say that even the rabbis would agree that hachai nosei es atzmo when it comes to humans? And therefore the rabbanan also shouldn't have any issue with selling horses to non-Jews, because even if Jews end up lending their horses to non-Jews on Shabbos, there's really no problem, because hachai nosei es atzmo. So ki Amar Rabbi Yochanan, so Rava will answer, when Rabbi Yochanan says that specifically Ben Beseira and Reb Nosson agree, that's bisus amyuchad leofis. That is by a horse that is specifically for birds, okay? Oh, and we're going to explain what this means in a second. But that's a horse that would transport birds. And because we're talking about transporting birds, it's true that only Reb Nosson would say that hachai nosei es atzmo applies to birds. As we saw earlier, the Chachamim would disagree and say that hachai nosei es atzmo does not apply to birds. They would say that you'd be chayev for carrying birds on Shabbos, because we don't say hachai nosei es atzmo. Is there such a thing as a horse that is specific for birds? The answer is yes. Ika deve vayadan. The bird trappers, they would, I guess part of how they would trap birds is they would have, I guess, certain birds that would catch other birds. And these birds would just kind of, they would take, I guess the birds would kind of sit on the horse, and they would take the horse out somewhere with the birds on it, and then the birds would go fly and catch other birds or something like that. So the point being that was what Rabbi Yochanan was referring to when he says Ben Beseira and Reb Nosson agree. Yeah, that's regarding these horses that transport birds. In that case, Reb Nosson and Ben Beseira agree that you'd be allowed to sell these horses to non-Jews, because even if you end up lending them to non-Jews and they use it for their bird kind of stuff on Shabbos, it would be okay, because hachai nosei es atzmo applies to birds. The Chacham, however, would disagree and say that hachai nosei es atzmo does not apply to birds. However, if we were talking about horses for human use, for humans to ride on, well, the Chacham would also agree, mistama, that you would be allowed to sell them to non-Jews, because there's no problem on Shabbos. If Jews end up lending it to them, they end up using it on Shabbos, it would be no problem, because hachai nosei es atzmo. Cool. Everybody getting it? It's not the hardest thing in the world, but I don't know, you do have to work through it slowly. Again, I was a little surprised at how long this stuff took me to learn, because it's not super duper hard, but it just, you do have to work through it kind of slowly, thoroughly, I think. Reb Yochanan, says Reb Yochanan, umode Reb Nosson b'chafus. Now, Reb Nosson, however, admits when it comes to a human being who is bound, who's tied up, okay? So meaning, while, let's say, we say if a person is riding a horse on Shabbos, so we would say that chai is nosei es atzmo, a human being carries himself, and therefore the horse isn't actually doing anything. However, if the human being is tied up somehow, well, then we don't apply chai nosei es atzmo, because he's limited in his movements. We don't say that he carries himself. I guess he's leaning more on the horse. Okay. Rav Ada bar Masna le'Abayis. Now says Rav Ada bar Masna to Abaye, Veha hani parsai. But what about these Persians? The Persians, they would wear all these robes, and all these robes would kind of limit their ability to move very well. So it's ki'ilu, they're tied up. Dichman dichfisei damu. It's as if they're kind of tied up and limited in their movements. From Rabbi Yochanan, Ben Beseira, Rabbi Nassan, Amud Davar Echad. Now, of course, as we know, that Rabbi Yochanan said that Ben Beseira and Rabbi Nassan agree when it comes to these horses that you would be allowed to sell them to non-Jews. And we're not concerned, right, you'd be allowed to sell them to non-Jews because even if they use them on Shabbos, well, achai nosei atzmo. But one second. When Ben Beseira says that you'd be allowed to sell these horses to non-Jews, any non-Jews, even Persian non-Jews, you'd be allowed to sell these horses to. But it sounds like Reb Nassan wouldn't necessarily agree with that. Because Reb Nassan would say, Mistama, that you wouldn't be allowed to sell these horses to Persians because Persians wear this fancy clothing that makes it difficult for them to move, and it's ki'ilu they're tied up, and we say that we don't apply achai nosei atzmo when you are tied up. So, on the one hand, Reb Nassan is saying that we don't apply achai nosei atzmo when a person is bound, yet Reb Yochanan seems to be saying that Ben Beseira and Reb Nassan agree regarding selling horses, and Ben Beseira says you could sell a horse to anybody, including Persian people. So then how could Reb Nassan and Ben Beseira be agreeing regarding that, while Reb Nassan apparently is claiming that if you're bound, then we don't say achai nosei atzmo anymore. So the Gemara answers, no, hasam musruachu denakid lehu. Da'u pardashcha derasach malka ilave v'rayit plus apayasi b'chare. So the Gemara answers, nah, that whole Persian thing, it's a hoax. It's just one big show. Sure, they're wearing fancy clothing, but the fact that they make you think that like they can't move because they're like wearing all this fancy clothing, it's mama's just a show. Rimus ruchahu. It's like, what does he say? It's gasus. It's just haughtiness. It's all a show. Da'ahu pardashcha, there was a certain officer, dirasach malka ilave, that the king got angry at him, and guess what? He ran 3 parsaos. That's like a bunch of miles. What's that? Like probably like 5 miles or something in this fancy clothing, and he was just fine. So therefore, these Persian clothing really is not considered as if you're tied up, and you would even be allowed to sell these horses to the Persian people, and we would still be able to apply achai nosei atzmo, even according to Reb Nassan. Alright, says the Mishnah, es hamez b'mita chayav v'chein kazayis min hamez v'chulei. Okay, so we said if you have a dead person in a bed, well then you will be chayav. So now we're gonna have an interesting sort of discussion about Rabbi Shimon's opinion regarding Melacha she'eina trikha legufa. Okay. So now, in this case, we would consider it a Melacha she'eina trikha legufa. So now, in understanding Reb Shimon's perspective towards Melacha she'eina trikha legufa, we're going to differentiate between 2 types of gufs. Okay? So, remember, let's talk about Melacha she'eina trikha legufa for a second. So, you have a Melacha. In this case, what's the Melacha? The Melacha is hotzah. You're taking out a mace. You're taking out a corpse. Unfortunately, somebody died, and you're taking them out of the house into Rosh Hashanah. Now, there are 2 aspects of this Melacha, or I guess probably of any Melacha, really. But over here, we're looking at 2 aspects here. There's legufo and legufa, I guess, right? Kilu, there's the person who's doing the activity, and then there's the object of the activity. The person doing the activity is, the person taking out the mace. So let's say Reuven died, and Shimon is taking him outside. So there's Shimon who's taking him outside, and we're thinking about his perspective. And then there's Reuven who died, and we're thinking about from his perspective. So in this case, Shimon, who's taking out Reuven who died, so he really didn't want, it's pretty b'di'evet, he didn't want that Reuven should die, right? And therefore, the whole Melacha that he's doing of taking Reuven out of the house, right? Shimon is taking Reuven out of the house, so it's really not something that he wanted in the first place, and he's just taking out Reuven from the house, the mace from the house, so that, maybe you don't want tumas mace in the house, whatever it is. Now there's the perspective of Reuven, who's the mace, so you're also not really benefiting him at all by taking him out of the house. We're going to see in a minute, what if you're actually going to take him out of the house to bury him on Shabbos? Well, in that case, I don't know whatever malachas there might be involved in burying him, but in that case, from the perspective of the mace, of Reuven in our example. So from the perspective of the mace, you are going to benefit him. You're burying him. It benefits him. So when we're saying, just strictly speaking, taking a mace out of a house on Shabbos, okay, so it's a melacha she'eina trikha legufa, and that really applies both legufo and legufa, right? Legufo of the person taking out the mace, he didn't want the mace to die. He's not really taking out the mace because he wants to be taking out a mace from his house, right? He's taking out a mace because there's a mace in his house and he just wants to get him out of the house. And from the perspective of the mace itself, well, you're not really benefiting the mace by taking him outside at all. So it's a melacha she'eina trikha legufa. This melacha is happening and really not benefiting anybody, okay? So now, so says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, which is interesting. You don't usually see Rava quoting Rabbi Yochanan. Rava, of course, and Rabbi Yosef were both in Bavel. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish were in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish were like second generation Amoraim. Rava was fourth generation. Rabbi Yosef was third generation. I don't know, it's just like these aren't names that you usually see quoted too often together. But anyways, Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Poter Hari Rabbi Shimon, Av b'motzi asameis lekovro. Interesting. So Rabbi Shimon would say that it's a melacha she'eina trikha legufa, and you're poter even if you're taking out the mace from the house in order to take him to the cemetery and bury him. So in this case, it's beneficial to the mace, who sort of, if we just use sort of objective terms, the mace here is the object of the melacha that you're doing, right? What you're doing is you're doing hotza'ah. And what are you taking out? You're taking out the mace. And here, it's benefiting the mace. It's for a positive value. You are bringing value to the mace and that you're bringing him to burial. However, it's not to the value of the person who, unfortunately, a relative or a friend passed away. For him, it's not beneficial. It's not a positive thing that's going on. Somebody died. If he had his way, this wouldn't be happening in the first place. So therefore, Reb Shimon says, even so in this case, still, the person taking him out, in our example, that would be Shimon taking out Reuven who died. So Shimon would be poter, because he didn't want this context, he didn't want this thing happening in the first place. So that's very interesting. So says the Gemara, Av b'motzi asameis lekovro, even when Shimon is taking out Reuven in order to bury him, which is positive for Reuven who's getting buried, but it's not positive. It's unfortunate for Shimon who has to bury him. Therefore, that's considered not trikha, melacha she'eina trikha legufa, and your poter. Amar Rava, says Rava, umode Reb Shimon, but Reb Shimon admits bimar lachbor bo v'sefer Torah likros bo dechayev. However, Reb Shimon would admit that if you take out a hoe in order to dig up some earth, okay, so the melacha being hotzah, and you're taking out this hoe, and you're taking out the hoe so that you can use it to dig with. Or if you take out a Sefer Torah, and you're taking it out to read from. In that case, it would be a melacha she'trikha legufa, and you would be chayiv. Let's go on a little bit. So the Gemara says, Pshita, obviously you should be chayiv. De'iha nami melacha she'eina trikha legufa. If we would consider this to be a melacha she'eina trikha legufa for whatever reason, right? Meaning in this case, you need the Sefer Torah. You need it, so you're taking it out so that you can read it. You're taking out the hoe so that you can dig with it. If you're going to say that these are melacha she'eina trikha legufa, then what the heck is a melacha she'trikha legufa? So then, el melacha she'trikha legufa l'Reb Shimon heichi mishkachas la. So the Gemara answers, I may have thought, adika legufa ulegufa, kigon mar lasos lo tas v'lachpor Sefer Torah lagia v'likros bo kamash malon. So I may have the havmina to say that in order for Reb Shimon to consider something to be a melacha she'trikha legufa, it would have to have both positive aspects, legufa ulegufa. So, in the case where you're taking out the hoe in order to dig with it, so it's trikha legufo, it's benefiting me, I'm taking it out so that I could dig with it, or the Sefer Torah, I'm taking it out to read it, alright, so it's beneficial to me. However, there's no benefit to the Sefer Torah. What benefit am I doing for it? I'm reading for it, I'm the one getting benefit, or for the hoe, right? Sure, I'm getting benefit from the hoe, but the hoe's not benefiting from it. So I might think that would also be a melacha she'eina trikha legufa. Because I might think that in order for something to be considered trikha legufa, according to Rabbi Shimon. I would need both aspects. That it'd be beneficial both for me as the one doing the activity, as well as the object of the activity would have to benefit from it. So Kamash Malan, what Rabbi Shimon is saying is that even though I'm the only one benefiting it, the hoe isn't benefiting from me taking it out, the Sefer Torah isn't benefiting from me taking it out, nonetheless, it's considered Melacha trikha legufa, and I'm going to be chayiv. So let's read it again, right? So Amar Rava umod Reb Shimon b'marlach porbo. The Reb Shimon admits when it comes to a hoe to dig with, v'sefer Torah likros bo, or a sefer Torah to read with, the chayiv, that you are going to be chayiv for taking it out. Pshita, the Gemara says, well, that's obvious, and then the Gemara says, well, it's not so obvious. So he says, right, the iha na'im melacha she'ena trikha legufa hi ela melacha she'trikha legufa Reb Shimon heichi mishkachas la, right? If these are if we would consider this melacha she'ena trikha legufa, then what would be melacha she'trikha legufa? Okay, no. So says the Gemara, because I would have thought adika legufa. I would have thought to say that Reb Shimon would only consider it to be a melacha she'trikha legufa when it benefits both the person doing the action as well as the object receiving the action. Kigon, for example, mar lasos bo tas vilach por. For example, if I was taking out this hoe, not just to dig with, which would benefit me, but also in order to straighten out any dents that might be in the hoe. So I'm also fixing the hoe, benefiting the hoe, and I'm also getting the benefit of digging with it. Sefer Torah le'agia v'likros bo. Or if I take out a Sefer Torah, both to check it, to go over it to make sure there are no mistakes, as well as to read from it. So I'm benefiting from it as well as the Sefer Torah is. So I may have had the thought, have a minute to say, that according to Reb Shimon, you would only be chayiv for, it would only be considered a melacha she'trikha legufa that you're chayiv for in this manner, when both I, as the doer of the action, as well as the object of the action, are both benefiting. Kamash Malan comes to teach us Rava that no, what's important to Reb Shimon, seemingly, is me, is the person doing the action. If I am benefiting from the action, then it's a melacha she'trikha legufa and I'm chayiv. If I am not benefiting from the action, then it's a melacha she'ena trikha legufa and I'm pater. And therefore, in the case where I'm taking out a mace to bury the mace, I'm not benefiting from the action. The mace is benefiting from the action. He's getting buried, but I'm not. I'm sad. I wish that he wouldn't have died. I'm not enjoying this. This isn't something that I want to be doing. Therefore, it's melacha she'ena trikha legufa, and Reb Shimon says that you're pater. Now, if I take out a Sefer Torah to read from it, I'm the only one benefiting. The Sefer Torah isn't benefiting. So therefore, Reb Shimon says that would be a melacha she'trikha legufa, and I would be chayiv. Because it seems that he seems to take into account when defining melacha she'trikha legufa or eina trikha legufa, depending on if the one who is doing the action is benefiting from it. It's interesting, right? Says the Gemara, "Ha'u shichva dahava b'drokeres." There was a mace. There was a dead body in the place called Drokeres. Shar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak la'afuke l'charmelis, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak permitted the people to take this mace and put it in a carmelis, right? Of course, carmelis being only rishus midrabanan. So I think you add a mace in rishus harabim, or maybe it was rishus hayachid. No, I think it was rishus hayachid. We'll see in a minute. So there was a mace in Rishus HaYachid, and it was like Bibizayon. It was kind of in a not mechubad place, wherever this Rishus HaYachid was, I guess. And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak allowed them to move the mace to a carmelis. Amar Reb Yochanan Achva de Marbre de Ravna, the Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Reb Yochanan Achva de Marbre de Ravna said to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Kiman, who are you allowing to remove this mace from a Rishus HaYachid into a carmelis? Reb Shimon? Are you going like Reb Shimon who says that melacha she'ena trikha legufa is pater? Emar de pater Reb Shimon michiyuv chatas isur da'abanan mi'aika. I'll say that, as we all know by now, as we all knew a long time ago already, that when we say pater on Shabbos means pater aval aser. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan Achva de Marbre de Ravna said to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, why are you permitting lichatchila for people to take out a mace from a Rishus HaYachid and put it in this carmelis? Reb Shimon only says that melacha she'ena trikha legufa is pater, but it's not mutter. Why are you allowing them to do this milichatchila? So Amar le Elohim da'aylas be'at. To which Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, what are you talking about? Elohim is always what? It's lashon shvua. It's what the heck are you talking about? Ba'afilu Rabbi Yehuda dami. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who says Melacha she'ena trikha legufa is chayav a korban chatos, would agree with what I'm allowing them to do. Because ka'amina l'rishus harabim, l'charmelis ka'amina. Am I telling them to take out the mace into rishus harabim? No way. I'm saying that they're allowed to take a mace and put it in a rishus hayachid. No, in a rishus, in a karmelis. To take it from a rishus hayachid to a karmelis, which is only an iser midirabanan. And of course, as we know also, kavod abrios shedoches losaisa shebatorah. That kavod abrios, as obviously is the case in this case with a mace who's in a disrespectful environment that you want to bring into a more respectful environment. I don't know what this karmelis was or why it was considered a more respectful environment, but that is certainly the implication. So taking this mace from Rishus HaYachid to a karmelis is only an Isser Midirabanan. It's only Otzah Midirabanan. And of course, as we know, that the Rabbanan, in making their Dinim Dirabanan, always baked into it that Bimakom Kavod Abrios, that when there's human dignity involved, they waive their Dinim, their Gezeras. And therefore, you would be allowed to bring this mace into a karmelis, even milichatchila, because of gadol kavod abrios shedoches losaisa shebetorah, that it pushes off a losaisa. Of course, that losaisa being of lo tasur min hadavar shegidu l'chav yom small, the iser to violate dinim derabanan. However, the dinim derabanan are always going to be waived when it has to do with human dignity. Okay, says the Gemara. So we had said in the Mishnah that you would be chayav for taking out a kezayis min hameis from a house on Shabbos, right? That is because you had a kezayis from a mace in the house, that's matame the house, and you're taking out the kezayis from the mace out of the house in order to remove that tumah from the house so that there won't be any more tumah in the house. Okay? So because that there's sort of a value in doing that, it's chashuv, and therefore you're going to be chayav for otzah. Now, it's not awesome. We learn over there in Masechta Negayim. Obviously, when it comes to things like Negayim and Zavim, we know it's going to be fun. So, atolesh simane tuma vehichva hamichya over below saise. Very good. So, okay, when it comes to tsaras, of course we know what tsaras is. It's this like skin disease, leprosy. I think it's defined as, I don't really know what leprosy is, but whatever. Although I did go to school for 2 years in Beit Hansen, which used to be a leper colony. Whatever. So okay, if you have leprosy, so the definition of a leprosy, of this like skin disease thing that would be considered, in order to consider it to be tsara'as, it has to have 2 white hairs in it. Okay? Another option is that you have to have this like, I don't know, a blemish or whatever, and inside there's like normal looking skin inside. So either one of those would be simane tuma. Okay, that would make you tamei with tsaras. So let's say you figured you have a bright idea. You have this tsaras, and there are 2 white hairs in there, and you know, gosh, I'm in big trouble. If I show it to the Kohen like this, I'm gonna have to go outside. I'm gonna go into quarantine for a few weeks, and I really don't want that. So he has a good idea. He'll just take out a tweezers, pull out one of the hairs, and he no longer has 2 hairs. Good idea, right? The other option would be, if there is healthy skin in the middle of it, so he says, oh no, that's going to be a problem. So he takes out a blowtorch and he burns himself so that he no longer has healthy skin in the middle of the blemish, and it won't be tamei anymore. So what if somebody does these things? So basically he was tamei and he's removing the tumah. Okay? So Tanan, Hasam, we learn over there in Negayim. Hatolish simane tuma. So if he has 2 white hairs and he plucks one out, thereby removing the tumah. Vihichva amichya, or if he burns the healthy skin that's inside of the blemish in order to make it not tamei anymore. Over below saisa. So he's violating a losaisa. Which losaisa? Of hishamer b'nega tsaras. Guard the affliction of tsaras. Hishamer is a lashon of lo ta'aseh, meaning don't mess it up. Don't pull out white hairs. Don't burn yourself. Fine. Itmar, we have machlokas amoraim. Achas mishtayim chayiv. Achas mishalosh. One second. I don't know. Whatever. I hope that at the beginning of Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph, it wasn't saying it was a machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes, machlokes between Rav Asher and Rav Sheshes. I can't remember. Let's go weiter. So, anyways, Itmar, here it's machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. So Itmar, achas mishtayim chayiv. If you pluck out, okay, so let's say you had 2 white hairs, okay? Let's say you had 2 white hairs, and you pluck one of them out. So obviously you're chayiv. Obviously you're chayiv, because 2 white hairs defines tuma. You're plucking out one of the white hairs so that you no longer have 2. It's only 1, so you're basically bringing it from a state of tuma into a state of tara. That's a problem. Okay? Achas mishalosh, but what if you have 3 white hairs and you only pull out one of them? So it's still going to be tuma. You're not messing with that. You go to the Kohen, he's going to tell you you're tameh. So by plucking out 1 white hair, what's the big deal? So if Nachman Amar chayiv, Rav Sheshes Amar pater. Rav Nachman says, nonetheless, you're chayiv. Rav Sheshes says, no, it's fine, you're pater. You didn't mess with the tuma. You still, if there were, there's still 2 hairs, it's still a blemish, still going to be chayiv. So if Nachman Amar chayiv, Rav Nachman says that you're chayiv because ahani maisav the imishtak lachad achrise azil tuma. Rav Nachman says that he's chayiv because, sure, at this point in time, he's not doing anything wrong. There were 3 white hairs, he removes one of them, there's still 2 white hairs, he's not messing with his status of tuma. But what happens now if one of those remaining 2 white hairs falls out? Now he's going to be tahor. But he's only going to be tahor because of the fact that he pulled out that 3rd one. If he wouldn't have pulled out the 3rd one, then he would still be tameh. So therefore, even though his action right now of plucking out this 3rd hair isn't doing anything wrong, it's still usher because if in the future another hair is going to fall out, he's going to be tahor, but only because of the fact that he pulled out that 3rd hair, and therefore it's a problem. Rav Sheshes Amar pater hashta mias ha'isa l'tuma. Rav Sheshes says he's pater because the fact of the matter is that his action that he's doing right now is not messing anything up. Right? He was tameh because he has 3 white hairs. He's pulling out one of them. He still has 2 white hairs. He's still tameh. I don't care what happens in the future. Right now he's not doing anything wrong. Therefore, Rav Sheshes says he's pater. Amar Rav Sheshes, mino aminala. And Rav Sheshes says, and you know how I know, where do I get my position from? Ditnan, from our Mishnah here in Shabbis, saying that you would not be allowed to remove a kazayas from a mace, a kazayas of flesh from a mace from a house on Shabbos, because you'd be changing the status of tumah of the house. And therefore, it's chashuv and it's a positive, you'd be chayiv for otzah. Ditnan, as we learn in our Mishnah, v'chein kazayas min ha-mace u'chazayas min ha-nevela chayiv. And similarly, you'd be chayiv for removing a kazayas that came from a mace or a kazayas that came from a nevela from the house. Hachatzi zayis pater, implying that if it was only half of a zayis, then you would be pater. There wouldn't be any significance. But 1 second, we have another brisa that says if you remove half a zayis of a mace from the house, you'd be chayiv. What's pshat? How do we resolve the two? Are you chayiv for taking out half a kazayis? Or are you pater? So my lab, Rav Sheshes wants to argue, haditan yechayiv. When you say that you're chayav, the apik chatzizayis mikizayis. When we say that you're chayav, mistama, it's talking about when there was a kazayis from the mace in the house. You're now you're cutting it in half, you're taking out half of it, and by doing so, you no longer have a kazayis from the mace in the house, which would be a shear to be matame the house. You now only have half a kazayis of the mace in the house, and that's not going to be matame the house anymore. And therefore we're saying that you would not be allowed to take out half a zayis from a mace when there was initially a full zayis, and by taking out that half of a zayis, you're now sort of messing with the status of tumah, and it's no longer tumah anymore because there's no longer a full zayis, which would be similar to basically plucking out 1 hair from 2 hairs, which wouldn't be allowed. V'haditnan pater, and when it says that you'd be pater, is the apik chatzi zayis mikzayis v'mechza. And when would you be pater for taking out half of a zayis? when there was a kazayis and a half from a dead body in the house. And in that case, when you take out only a half of a zayis, you would be patur because you're still leaving a full zayis in the house. So you're not messing with the status. Sure, if now you are putting it sort of in a more delicate state, that now if some of the kazayis goes away somehow, some of the kazayis that's left in the house goes away somehow, there's no longer going to be a kazayis in the house, and the house is no longer going to be tameh. And the only reason why it's not tameh is specifically due to the fact that you had already removed half of the zayis to make it sort of a very constricted amount. But we seem to be saying that we don't care. If you take out half of a zayis, you're patur, because as long as you're leaving that zayis there, you're going to be chayiv. As long as you're leaving that zayis there, so the tumah remains, and that's fine. And therefore, that is how Rav Sheshes makes the same argument that when you have 3 hairs and you remove one, you're going to be patur as well, even though that does mean that if one of the 2 remaining hairs falls out, it's going to be tahor now, and that's only due to the fact that you removed the 3rd hair, but that would be okay, just like when you remove the half of a zayis from a kazayis and a half, it's okay since you're leaving the kazayis in the house. For Rav Nachman, idi v'idi chayiv. Whereas Rav Nachman says that no, in both of those cases, you would be chayiv. Whether you take out a half of a zayis from a full zayis, or whether you take out a half a zayis from a zayis and a half, you're going to be chayiv in both of those cases, for the same reason that he says that you're going to be chayiv for removing 1 hair when there are 3 there. Because, if at a later point, one of those hairs falls out, or if at a later point, that kazayis that remains becomes smaller, it's going to change the status of tumah, and it's directly connected to the activity that you did. When we say that you're patur for taking out half a zayis, that's talking about when you're taking out half of a zayis from a large zayis, in which case, there's still plenty of mace left in the house, and, we're really not concerned that you're going to affect the shear of tumah becoming small enough that it goes away. In that case, you'd be patur because yeah, sure, you're leaving the mace in the house, and it's going to remain tameh, and it's not really going to become smaller than that. And even if it does, it won't be small enough that it won't be tameh anymore. Okay. New Mishnah. Hanotel tzipornav zo bezo o b'shinav. Okay, if somebody removes his fingernails on Shabbos, either by using one fingernail against another fingernail, i.e. without some kind of a nail clipper or something, o b'shinav, or he uses his teeth to remove he bites his nails, v'chein sairo, if somebody kind of pulls out his hair, v'chein tzvamo, or his mustache, v'chein zukano, or his beard, v'chein agudeles, or if you braid your hair, v'chein akocheles, or if you put on blue eyeliner, blue eyeshadow, v'chein apokeses, if you put on blush. I think that's like maybe red stuff that you put on your cheeks, maybe? Rabbi Eliezer mechayev. Rabbi Eliezer says that you are chayev, v'chacham osin mishum shvus, and chacham say it's patur aval aser. Okay, very cool. Okay, says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Elazar, also says Rabbi Elazar the Amora, of course, Rabbi Elazar ben Pidas, right? And we've in the Mishnah been talking about Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus, who's the Tana. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, machlokes biyad. So the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah and the Rabbanan in our Mishnah. The Rabbi Eliezer says it's usher to remove your fingernails, and the Chacham say it's patur aval aser. Meaning, Rabbi Eliezer says that you chayav a korban chatas. The Chacham says it's patur aval aser. That is if you remove the fingernails with your hands. Aval bechli, if you use a like nail clipper or nail scissors, divrei kol chayav. Everyone is going to say you're chayav. Even the Chacham will say that you're chayav. Pshita is not obvious. Zo bezotnan. I mean, the Mishnah, after all, says if you remove it with your hands, implying that if you remove it with a nail clipper, you'd be chayiv. So ma'u detema, I may have had the havmina to say, Rabbanan b'chli nami patre. That the Rabbanan say, no, you'd also be patur if you use a nail clipper. For the katani zo bezo, then why does it say that, specifically you're patur if you remove it with your hands? To show you to what extent Rabbi Eliezer maintains his opinion to say that you're chayiv, even when it's just with your hands. Kamash Malan, so Rabbi Eliezer is teaching us that that the Chacham specifically say that you're patur when you do it with your hands, but you'd be chayiv if you do it with a nail clippers. From Rabbi Lazar, and says Rabbi Lazar, machlokas la'atzmo chavero divrei kol pater. Rabbi Lazar says that the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer, who says chayiv, and the chacham who say pater, is only when he's taking off his own fingernails. But even Rabbi Eliezer would admit that you're pater if you take off your friend's fingernails. Exciting. So pshita is not obvious. Tzipornav tnan. It says in the Mishnah that taking off his fingernails, and that's where Rabbi Eliezer says that you're chayiv. So Mahaditema may have thought Rabbi Eliezer lechaveru nami mechayiv. Rabbi Eliezer says no, you're also chayiv if you take off your friend's fingernails. So why does it say his fingernails? To teach you the koach of the Rabbanan, who say that even when it's his own fingernails, he's still going to be pater. Okay, exciting stuff. V'chein sairo chule, and also his hair. Tana, we learn in a brisa, hanotel milo pi azug b'Shabbos chayiv. So we have a brisa that says that if on Shabbos you remove enough hairs from your head to fill up, like, I don't know, the tip of like a scissors or something, chayiv. V'chamim lo pi azug. How much is this? Revuda shtaim. Revuda says it's 2 hairs. Okay, if you remove 2 hairs on Shabbos, you're chayiv. Fine. Ve'atanya ulekorcha shtaim. But 1 second, in that same brisa it says, and to make yourself bald is 2 hairs. Meaning, the pasuk says, Lo sasimu korcha le'nechem lemeis, right? It says that if somebody dies, do not make a bald spot between your eyes. Do not make a bald spot between your eyes. And how do we define that? That's 2 hairs. So that we want to argue that if we're saying in this brisa that melo pi azug, and then we're mentioning the shear of a korcha is 2 hairs, that implies that melo pi azug would not be 2 hairs. So ema v'chein lekorcha shtaim. So the Gemara says no. Just say, and similarly, making a bald spot would be considered when it's 2 hairs, meaning that on Shabbos do not remove 2 hairs, and also for a mace don't make a bald spot of 2 hairs. Tanan Amiyachi, we also learn in a brisa like this. Anota melo pi azug b'Shabbos chayiv. Somebody takes out enough to for the tips of scissors on Shabbos is chayiv. V'chama melo pi azug. How much is that? Shtaim. Rabbi Eliezer omer achas. Rabbi Eliezer though says that it's actually just 1 hair. Umodim chacham Rabbi Eliezer b'melaket levanos mitoch shcharos shafilu achas chayiv. However, the chacham agree with Rabbi Eliezer that if you are removing white hairs, that if a man is removing white hairs, so even 1 hair would be chayiv. And during the week, however, this isn't just a Shabbos thing. The Chacham would say this during the week as well. If a man is removing a white hair because he's self-conscious that he doesn't want to look old, so we say that he'll be chayiv even during the week, because it would be a violation of a different halacha of lo yubash gever simlas isha. A man should not wear a woman's garment, and that applies not just to women's garments, but also to pulling out white hairs from black hairs. Okay, the assumption, I guess, was that was something that women would be more interested in doing than men. Interesting. Okay. Tani, we learn in a brisa. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer says, Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Tziporin sheperesh ruba. Okay. What if you have a fingernail that is already mostly removed? Exciting. V'tzitzin sheperesh ruban, or cuticles that are mostly removed already. So biyad muter b'chli chayev. So you can just finish off the job with your hand, no problem. 100% mutar. Bechli, but if you use some kind of a implement, some kind of a scissors or such, then you'd be chayev. Chatas. Now the Gemara says, 1 second. Is there really something that if you do it with a kli, you'd be chayev chatas, yet if you do it with your hand, you're mamish mutar l'chatchila? So, hachikama, this is what it means. Pershu ruban, if the majority of the fingernail or of the cuticle already fell off, well then biyad mutter, to remove it with your hand is mutter, b'chli pater avalaser. Using a kli would be pater avalaser at this point. Lo perish ruban, well if it's less the majority that's already removed, well then biyad pater avalaser, removing it with your hand would be pater avalaser, b'chli chayev chatas. With a kli, you would be chayev a korban chatas. Amarav Yehuda halacha Reb Shimon ben Elazar. So Yehuda says the halacha Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Amarav Bar Bachanam Rav Yochanan v'hu shepershu klapi ma'ila u'mitzaros soso. And says Rav Bar Bachanam and Rav Yochanan that when we talk about removing these cuticles, I guess being I guess if it's a majority, then it would be mutter, and if it's a minority, then it would be pater avalaser. So with your hand at least, that's talking about if the cuticles are facing upwards and they are causing you pain. But if they're, I guess, facing downwards and not really uncomfortable, so then you wouldn't be able to remove them. Exciting stuff. Woo, that was some daf, right? I don't know, like, it wasn't like really hard, but you had to do it slowly. I don't know. It was unassuming for me. I didn't expect it to be that involved. Anyways, friends, let's go over what we talked about. So we started by talking about taking out food in a kli on Shabbos. So first we said that you would be chayev for the food and pater for the kli, right? Meaning assuming that you take out more than a dried fig's worth, so you'll be chayev for taking out the food on Shabbos. You'll be pater for taking out the kli because it is tafel to the food. Now, if, however, you need the kli as well, such as if it's a Tupperware and you're going to a potluck, well, then you're also going to be chayev for the kli. And what does it mean that you're chayev for the kli? Shouldn't it be like ochel shtei chelev be'elam achas enu chayev ela achas? Shouldn't it be like if you eat 2 kezesim of chelev, you only chayev 1 korban chatas? So you should be chayev 1 korban chatas here also for the food and for the kli. So Reb Sheshes said it's talking about actually where you were b'shogeg about the food, but you were b'mezid about the kli, and therefore you're chayev a korban chatas for the food, but you're going to be chayev misa for the kli. And Rav Ashi says that you were shogeg for both. You were shogeg for both the food and for the kli. However, you were notified about it separately. And it goes back to that machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish about when you eat 2 zeisim of chelev and then you found out about one and then later you find out about the other one. So Rabbi Yochanan says you have to bring 2 korban chatases, and that's going to be like Rav Ashi. Whereas Rish Lakish says you'd only bring 1 korban chatas, and Rav Sheshes holds like Rish Lakish, which is why he had to explain that the food was b'shogeg and the kli was b'mezid. We talk about taking out animals on Shabbos. The Chum say that whether they're alive, whether they're dead, you would be chayav. Whereas Rav Nassan says that if they're dead, you'd be chayav, but if they're alive, it would be pater because of the concept of chay nosei atzmo. And then the question is, this is machlokas by animals between the Chacham and Rav Nassan. How does it apply to humans? So Rava says that when it comes to humans, even the Chacham would agree that it would be pater because chay nosei atzmo. Then we tried to ask questions from selling a horse to a non-Jew. Ben Becerra says that you'd be allowed to sell a horse to a non-Jew because even if you end up lending horses to non-Jews and they use the horse on Shabbos, it would nonetheless be pater aval aser. It would be pater for because chay nosei atzmo, so therefore that's why that's okay. Fine, we talked about Melacha trikha legufa according to Reb Shimon in the context of taking a mace out of a house, and we got, I think, a better understanding of Rabbi Shimon's opinion, which is that he says he seems to be defining Melacha trikha legufa in terms of the person who's doing the activity. Right? If the person doing the activity wants to be doing the activity, well then it's a Melacha trikha legufa. If he doesn't want to be doing the activity, such as like taking out a mace on Shabbos, it will be Melacha trikha legufa, and you will be pater. Okay, then we got into that interesting discussion about, when you have tsaras and you have like 2 hairs and you remove one, then you would be chayav. But if you had 3 hairs and you remove one, so then we had this machlokas between Rav Sheshes and Rav Nachman. So Rav Sheshes says you would be pater because at the end of the day you're still leaving 2 hairs and it remains tameh. Rav Nachman says that you're going to be chayav because even though right now you're still, there's still 2 hairs and it remains tameh, but in the future if one of those remaining hairs falls out, it's going to be tar, and that's directly connected to the fact that you had at this point pulled out the 3rd one. Okay, and then Rav Sheshes, and then we tried to see if it kind of is similar to taking out a kazayis min hameis from our Mishnah. Fine, I'm not going to get into that right now. And then we talked about removing fingernails, and basically the point is if the majority is already removed, so then you're allowed to remove it with your hand. However, removing it with a kli would be pater aval aser, but if the majority is not removed, so then with your hand would be pater aval aser, with the kli would be aser, would be chayav chatas. And friends, that was a very interesting daf of Daf Tzadi Daled. I hope you guys have a great day or a great night and a great life.